I'm Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg wraps up his grilling before Congress. We will bring you the biggest takeaways from those who hold the power in Washington. Plus, a Bloomberg exclusive, our conversation with SoFi's new CEO Anthony Noto on his plans to rewrite the rules at the online loan refinancer and revamp the company's culture. And it is the Big Apple versus Silicon Valley. We explore the New York tech scene with a top VC and the CEO of the fintech startup Betterment. But first to our lead. It has been a long week for Mark Zuckerberg. Still, the Facebook CEO emerged mostly unruffled after 2 hearings before Congress. Zuckerberg generally kept his cool, even as lawmakers downplayed his apologies over failures to protect user privacy and his assurances to do better. Some coming at the Facebook CEO with stern words. Take a listen.
How can consumers have control over their data when Facebook doesn't have control over the data itself? That's my concern.
Who's going to protect us from Facebook is also a question.
Mr. Zuckerberg, I tell you, I think your cozy community, as Dr. Mark Jameson recently said, is beginning to look a whole lot like The Truman Show, where people's identities and relationships are made available to people that they don't know.
Your platform is still being used to circumvent the law and allow people to buy highly addictive drugs without a prescription. With all due respect, Facebook is actually enabling an illegal activity, and in so doing, you are hurting people.
You've said everyone controls their data, but you're collecting data on people that are not even Facebook users, that have never signed a privacy agreement, and you're collecting their data.
So where does the social network go from here? We posed that question to Roger McNamee, co-founder of Elevation Partners, and our very own Sarah Fryer.
So all of those times during the 10 hours of testimony that Zuckerberg says, I'll have my team follow up with you on that, now that's happening. So the congressmen are giving their questions to Facebook staff. Facebook staff has to go through and meticulously answer them all. And then we'll get some really interesting answers that take a little longer than the 5 seconds Zuckerberg had to respond in many cases.
And look, he said, I'll have my team follow up with you many, many, many times. Roger, I'm sure you were listening in. How satisfied were you with what you heard from Mark Zuckerberg, and how satisfied were you with the questions from lawmakers?
I would give both mixed results for reasons that I think are obvious about the structure of the hearings themselves. I mean, think about it. During the Senate hearing, in the first hour and a half, there were at least a dozen different issues that senators raised, areas of really serious concern. And that helped Mark respond because he didn't have to worry about prosecutorial technique being applied at him, just hammering him on the same issue over and over. He was able to say, I'll get back to you, and then move on to the next topic. The problem with that, and this is where I think he's got a real issue here, is that Facebook may be like a rock, but this scandal is like water pouring over it. It's going to erode the rock. And the trust of Facebook, I think, is in severe jeopardy right now. And Mark and Sheryl have no one to blame but themselves. They've handled this thing in a cavalier fashion. And it's really serious. I mean, we're talking about democracy. We're talking about civil liberties. We're talking about the rights of human beings in places like Myanmar and the Philippines. And so, they have to be more focused.
That said, Mark Zuckerberg told us that it hasn't had a meaningful impact on usage. Sheryl Sandberg told me and Sarah Fryer, that only a few advertisers have paused their spending. And then we have this TechPinion survey. How do we make sense of that?
So I don't know about the TechPinion survey because it's really easy to say you've deleted the app, whether you have or haven't. I will be stunned if we don't see a change in usage both in the March and June quarters because of this in North America and Western Europe. And I just think that the erosion of trust is so staggering at this point that from Facebook's point of view, it goes after just what the business really is. And I think they've forgotten that they don't have a birthright here. They require consumers' willingness to work with them. And Mark's responses to a lot of those questions, particularly Senator Durbin's question about his hotel room, would he divulge where he had stayed? And then Representative Eshu's comments about, the business model and the inherent invasions of privacy. Those things are a tell. And they give consumers a sense, wait a minute, these people view us as fodder. They view us as fuel for their profits. They don't view us as customers or even human beings.
Now, there was another issue that came up several times, specifically in the House hearings, where the questions were rightfully and luckily more pointed and better informed, I believe, than the Senate hearing. Representative Kathy Castor asked this of Mark Zuckerberg about what happens and how does Facebook track users off Facebook, including users who've never signed up for Facebook in the first place. Take a listen to that exchange.
You are collecting personal information on people who do not even have Facebook accounts. Isn't that right?
Congresswoman, I believe that
yes or no?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure. I don't think that that's what we're tracking.
No, you're collecting, you have already acknowledged that you are doing that for security purposes and commercial purposes. So you're collecting data outside of Facebook. When someone goes to a website and it has the Facebook like or share, that data is being collected by Facebook, correct?
Congresswoman,
yes or no?
That's right, that we understand in order to show which of your friends.
Yeah, so for people that don't even have Facebook, I don't think that the average American really understands that.
Roger, is it true that several other internet companies do similar things like Google? And if so, what's so bad about this?
So I think there are a million things that are wrong with it. Yes, lots of internet companies do it. I use a product called Ghostery on my phone and on my computer to block trackers exactly like this. And it's simply frightening. For any given page I land on, there will be between half a dozen and say 15 different trackers that people have attempted to insert into my browser as I'm searching around the web. And in my mind, the whole thing is a massive invasion of privacy predicated on a lie, on this notion that none of this is really going on. And I think as consumers begin to understand the degree to which they are being used as fuel for business models that they have no real benefit from, I think that's, again, the trust erodes a lot further, and it goes way beyond Facebook, as you pointed out. I think Facebook is in the crosshairs because its impact on elections is so great. But in reality, in everyday life, Google has a profound impact, and things like Instagram and Snapchat and especially YouTube have just an unbelievable impact on society and on, mental health.
But Roger, I think one of the reasons that people are really upset with Facebook in particular is because Facebook is going out there and saying, you're in control of your data. We built this for you. You own basically everything you do on this platform. It's all about you. And this questioning from Castor really cut at that point from Zuckerberg. It's not your choice to share your data if Facebook is even tracking information on people who don't even have accounts. So I think that exactly.
I think you're exactly correct. You're exactly correct. And I think Representative Castor, that was the opposite of grandstanding. What that was brilliantly well-informed questions from a legislator charged with protecting the public interest. And we all owe her a massive note of thanks because she and literally a couple dozen other members of Congress did us a public service. They exposed a lot of the nonsense that's going on. And, Representative Sarbanes asked really important questions, and, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Klobuchar. I mean, it was a really long list of really fine, Senator Kennedy. And, when I look at this, the problem here is that we were asleep. We love the products, we love the convenience, we love the fun, we love the kitten photos. But at the end of the day, in order to monetize that, these companies got involved in surveillance. And the surveillance they did is every bit as intrusive as what a spy agency would do. And the difference is that they're not doing it for the national interest. They're doing it for their profits.
Roger, hang on. You're going to stay with us, Sarah. I have to let you go. But before you go, you're following up on some things in the hearing that were surprising. Things like Cambridge University and what Zuckerberg had to say about that Facebook is investigating more broadly whether something bad is happening there. Yep. What else are we, the Bloomberg News team, looking into?
I think one of the very important points in the testimony was that AI is going to solve everything. All of these questions about whether Facebook is treating its content the right way, whether there are biases, whether they're taking down hateful content fast enough, they offered AI as a solution to all of that. And AI is trained by humans that have the same biases as any of us. And it's not going to end well.
That was Roger McNamee, co-founder at Elevation Partners, and Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer. Well, Google's YouTube is being accused of violating U.S. law on children's privacy. A coalition of child advocacy and consumer groups has asked the government to investigate. The groups say YouTube uses the information to illegally target ads. YouTube said in a statement that it will look into the complaint to determine if improvements are necessary. Coming up, our exclusive conversation with SoFi CEO Anthony Noto on how he is shaping the company's future now that he is at the helm. And later in the show, we'll hear from Representatives Ro Khanna of California and Leonard Lance of New Jersey, their reaction to the Facebook hearings and thoughts on the future of tech regulation. This is Bloomberg. In the battle for e-commerce supremacy in India, Walmart may be about to leave Amazon in its wake. India's leading e-commerce company, Flipkart, is said to be leaning towards selling to Walmart, this according to people familiar with the matter. Both companies are bidding for a controlling stake at a $20 billion valuation. That is $8 billion more than Flipkart's 2017 valuation. If completed, the deal would give Walmart a major stake in an emerging market of 1.3 billion people. SoFi has named Michelle Gill, a former Goldman Sachs executive, as its next chief financial officer, filling a role that's been vacant since last summer. It's the first major appointment made by new CEO Anthony Noto. The company also announced it surpassed 500,000 users. We caught up with Noto at the Lendit conference in San Francisco to talk about his plans since taking the helm at SoFi. Take a listen.
We have to continue to build on our core loan products and student loan refinancing, personal loans, mortgages. We need to continue to build out, and there are other loan products that we can add. But the real opportunity is to add a complete set of financial services products, including SoFi Money, which is a modern take on a bank account, SoFi Wealth, which is an ability to invest with SoFi, SoFi Credit Card, and SoFi Advice. And so much of 2018 will be about building those products, but still making sure our core products perform well.
You've been there 6 weeks. What is it that you want to do differently?
I think the most important thing we do as a company is build a culture that we're all proud of, a culture that's welcoming and inclusive, a culture that reflects society. We have to have a diverse employee base if we're going to serve our members, and our number one core value is that our members' interests always come first. In order to serve them well, then we have to reflect society, and so we have to have a diverse employee base that reflects the diversity of society.
Since you mentioned culture, the former CEO Mike Cagney left amid sexual harassment allegations. The CFO as well. In fact, half a dozen employees or so have stepped down from executive roles as a result of the chaos. When you walk into a company, what's your first order of business, knowing that the culture has been toxic for a really long time?
Sure. We focused on three things in my first 6 weeks. One was reforecasting 2018, making sure we're aligned in our top 5 priorities and building objectives and key results against each one of those 5 priorities. And then third, critically important to your question, is to lay out what core values do we want to have as a company. We're building on a process that took place right after the change in management called One SoFi, and I've worked with the leadership team to define 11 core values. Those core values will build the foundation of the culture we're trying to build. The next important step is educating the entire company on those core values, the behaviors that we expect from those core values, and then rewarding those that are culture carriers and punishing those that are not culture carriers. And we'll have no tolerance for employees that can't help build a great culture.
You've just hired a as CFO, Michelle Gill, from Goldman, which is interesting given that people are saying Goldman is increasingly your competitor. Is this an effort to, take on the Goldman or Goldmans of the rest of the financial world?
Not at all. It's an effort about building a diverse company and hiring the best leaders. Michelle is a unique combination of a phenomenal leader, a financial expert, and a culture builder. And that really set her apart from the rest of the candidates. And we saw a great slate of candidates. So we're really pleased that we were able to hire Michelle. I didn't know her prior to this process and really enjoyed the hours I've spent with her talking about the vision for the company, where we can go from the product set, and importantly, building a really strong culture. And so that was a rare combination. We're really lucky that we were able to convince her to join our team.
SoFi has had a few stumbles over the last year when it comes to the business. The IPO, for example, has been delayed a couple of times. Why is that? And what are the challenges?
Yeah, I think it's important to first recognize the incredible success that companies achieved. $12.9 billion of funded volume last year, up more than 60%. The company not only achieved positive EBITDA and a significant amount of EBITDA, growing the top line very significantly and reaching scale, but also free cash flow and GAAP profitability. We want to build on that success in 2018. One important area is the culture and building that foundation, but we have to invest in these other products that create more of a daily habit and more of a recurring revenue stream in order to accomplish our overall mission, which is to help people achieve financial independence.
Do you see SoFi as a public company someday, and if so, when?
It's not a priority in 2018, but absolutely I see being public in our future. We want to make sure we put in place the right building blocks. As I mentioned, we're going to make sure that we strengthen our core products, invest in new products, and then most critically, building out this membership experience. Our ability to achieve not just a rational benefit, but also an emotional benefit is bringing together a real membership experience. And so we want to nail all three of those things before we enter the public markets.
So 2 years, 3 years? What's a reasonable time frame?
I would say I'm not putting a time frame on it as much as I am conditions, which I just described.
Mark Zuckerberg is testifying this week in D.C. before Congress. Facebook is in the middle of a huge controversy. And speaking, of Facebook, Twitter has been dragged down as Facebook has over the last few weeks. Where did Facebook go so wrong?
It's a very complicated situation for them in particular, and so I would have to spend more time with you to kind of go through my thoughts on it. What I can say is what we're focused on, and what we're focused on is making sure that we have the right core values and leadership at the top of the company to ensure that our members are never surprised, and to make sure their interests come first. And that involves not just transparency, but also information and education. And as long as we put their interests first and provide that transparency in addition to the information and making sure they're educated on what they're doing, we won't surprise them and we'll avoid some of the pitfalls that we're hearing about in the news.
Do you think tech needs to be regulated?
I think an industry is regulated when the leadership within that industry can't adequately abide by some standards that they establish in running their business. And ultimately, if the leadership can step up in all of these different companies to provide the right business environment, the right consumer environment, then they'll do it themselves. And there's no need for an outside force.
Well, the financial industry has been regulated for a long time, and some would say it's pretty clear that tech can't regulate itself. So does that mean tech needs regulation?
I think tech's a pretty broad term that involves everything from software to hardware to consumer technology and media. And within the media landscape, there is a fair amount of regulation. And so the FTC, some of the other important regulatory bodies do provide regulation that they all have to comply with, including personal private information. So there are some new areas that require a greater scrutiny, and the leaders within the industry should focus on solving those areas where there isn't transparency and there needs to be.
That was SoFi CEO Anthony Noto. Coming up, First Smart Capital is one of the biggest VC firms in New York with investments in Airbnb, Shopify, and Pinterest. We'll talk about the investment climate in New York versus Silicon Valley with a partner at the firm. This is Bloomberg. Apple is launching two versions of its iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, and this is the second year in a row Apple has rolled out a red version of the latest iPhone. The new color option could boost sales of the overshadowed iPhone line, and the phones are part of the Product Red initiative that donates a percentage of sales to the global fund to fight HIV and AIDS. Now, we've been covering all the angles of the unprecedented testimony of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg in Washington over the last 2 days. Since the Cambridge Analytica data scandal broke, it has put serious pressure on Facebook's stock, wiping out its gains in 2018. But what about investor sentiment in the private markets? Beth Ferreira, managing director at First Mark Capital, joined us to discuss.
I think the sentiment in the public market mirrors very much the private market. So yes, yesterday, I think people were pleasantly surprised that Mark was able to handle the scrutiny yesterday and held his own. And you saw that in the public markets. In the private markets, we feel the same way. The overarching question is whether or not there's going to be increased regulation. I think he made a good point of that increased regulation. The bigger companies like his are going to be able to weather that storm. The smaller companies, that becomes a much bigger burden for them. And so there's a question there. But ultimately, I don't see any sort of slowdown in private market investing. If not, a continued acceleration.
Are these questions you're asking about in pitch meetings? How are you collecting this data? And is this really, not necessarily legal, but, does this meet our sort of moral standard of what is possible?
Privacy has always been a concern, and so those are questions that we definitely ask when any company is collecting personal data. It's how do you use that data? And I think, Facebook has taken the stance that they're a tools company, and that piece is not, wasn't important or wasn't part of their purview. It puts increased scrutiny on that as companies grow.
And is the public market volatility, and specifically the volatility we're seeing in the tech markets, impacting private valuations at all?
We haven't seen it, and if anything, private company valuations have been steady, if not accelerating.
So, we often compare New York to Silicon Valley. New York, I know there's a lot of exciting things happening here in the tech scene, but there still hasn't been that multi-billion-dollar exit. When will that happen? Will that happen?
So we're seeing a continued acceleration. There has been a lot of buzz in the market about New York and how it's going to grow, and we've seen over the last 5 years a big increase in the number of not only the number of companies that have been founded here, but the number of exits. And we also have a nice pipeline of potential companies that will exit at multiple billion-dollar valuations. Whether it's Oscar Health, WeWork, Cadre, there are some in the pipeline. So, the other question is, where are those venture dollars going? And so I get asked a lot, is New York a real market? Is it a competed market? And I'd say almost every single deal that we've looked at, over the last 2 years have had Silicon Valley investors competing for them.
Now, you're First Mark's second female partner, I believe, which is awesome. And I just wrote a whole book about diversity in Silicon Valley, Brotopia. And some of the things that I've heard anecdotally are that New York is better than Silicon Valley on diversity, or New York feels like it's a more inclusive place. In fact, I talked to many entrepreneurs who left Silicon Valley to come to New York and keep building their companies here. Do you think there's any truth to that idea that New York is less of a Brotopia than Silicon Valley proper?
Well, New York has always been a melting pot, not only for the people that are here, but the industries that are here. And so, we know that 40% of tech workers here are women, 20% are people of color. So, that's a dramatic difference than Silicon Valley. So yes, I believe that, here it's a little bit more diverse. There's access to different types of talent across many industries.
But what still needs to happen? It's certainly not enough.
It's certainly not enough. I think that's true. I think we need, it's still a developing market. And so we're seeing really nice trends here. And I think, we'll continue to see more dollars come in here. And in the third quarter of 2017, we saw more dollars come to New York than Silicon Valley in the early stage side, so 4.2 versus 4.1. I think we'll continue to see that trend.
That was Beth Ferreira, First Mark Capital Managing Director. Coming up, we've got Washington's reaction to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's testimony this week with Congressman Ro Khanna and Leonard Lance. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Well, Mark Zuckerberg's time on Capitol Hill and his testimony is over, and a new bill has already been introduced to protect consumer rights. The Consent Act, penned by Senators Blumenthal and Markey, would require the FTC to create new online privacy protections for users of sites like Facebook and Google. Congressman Ro Khanna of California's 17th District in the heart of Silicon Valley joined us to discuss the past hearing this week and what new laws might be to come.
I was pleased that Mark Zuckerberg agreed to testify, that he subjected himself to 5 hours of testimony, both in the Senate and the House. This was long overdue. Facebook should have been testifying much earlier. And I was pleased that he's at least open to well-crafted regulations. I was concerned on two areas. One, it seemed that the Senate has a knowledge gap. Many of these senators haven't really used Facebook and Twitter, and it was apparent after they asked their first questions and Zuckerberg parried back, they were really unable to press him or get into the depth. And second, it's not Zuckerberg's job to just clean up the mess. It's Congress's job to regulate, to pass laws, to have strong protections. We're the ones who were elected to protect the American public. And there wasn't a sufficient commitment or discussion about what an Internet Bill of Rights would look like.
What should Congress do then?
Well, I think that there's some very common sense things that we ought to do. First, you ought to have a right to know your data. For example, if you want to know your financial information, you can go get your credit report. You can know who's asked for that credit information, who is trying to get information about you. You should have the ability to do that with all your data. You should be able to inquire of Facebook or Twitter or Google or Cambridge Analytica to give you a report of your data. We have these rights also for health. Second, you should be able to update your data. Third, you should be able to move your data, delete your data. Europe has a comprehensive set of these rights. I think the European regulation goes too far, but we should take some of those principles and have a robust framework here in the United States.
That said, we're talking about a massive data breach that happened on Facebook's platform, on Facebook's watch. We're talking about an election that was meddled in by, state actors on Facebook's watch. And in both cases, Facebook had warnings. Facebook knew about these issues before the company revealed them to the public. So where did Facebook fall short, in your opinion?
Well, they clearly did fall short, and they need to assume responsibility. First, they fell short in disclosure. All the reports I've read suggest that they should have, and they knew about this, a breach back in 2015. They didn't notify the users. They didn't notify the FTC. They didn't notify the press. Had they done that, a lot of the harms may have been avoided. Second, they clearly didn't have sufficient oversight. I mean, to have being paid in rubles and to have Russians buying ads and not knowing about that, or that not setting off alarm bells is deeply concerning. And third, they allowed false propaganda to spread and go viral on their social media site without any verification. I'm glad they are now owning up to the mistakes. I still believe in the power of social media to do good, but there were clear abuses, and they need to be transparent going forward and make real efforts to fix it. But that's not enough. Congress also needs to regulate. We can't rely on the self-regulation of Facebook or tech companies.
A lot of the questions today focused on Facebook's tracking of users off Facebook, including users who never signed up for it in the first place. Should Facebook be able to track user behavior across the internet off Facebook, even if they don't have a Facebook account, which means they could never agree to the terms of service?
Well, this is exactly why we need an Internet Bill of Rights. So, for example, if you use Firefox, the Mozilla browser, Facebook would never be able to do that because Firefox contains your data. Whereas if you use for the Safari browser, they may give the cookies or that data to Facebook if they have agreements with Facebook. And you actually have to go change on your iPhone the default settings on Safari to say, no, I don't want my data data shared. This is what I mean where members of Congress need to be using these platforms more. They don't need to be computer scientists or coders, but they have to understand what these platforms do. And we need to then have laws saying, let's move to a world more like Mozilla Firefox, where users clearly have the right to know what's happening with their data and to have their data contained, so Facebook can't do these searches. It's why, for example, you could go on the internet, surf the internet and want to buy ties, and suddenly on Facebook, even though you've never liked ties, you start seeing ads pop up with ties and marketing them to you. And you say, why is that happening on Facebook? It's because Facebook often has information that advertisers have shared with them. And I do think an Internet Bill of Rights would stop that from happening.
You've said that we can't leave the security of our elections up to an internet entrepreneur. Facebook says it's working on new tools that will be in place before the midterm elections to prevent what happened in 2016 from happening again. Do you believe them? And if not, how concerning is that? And what can Congress do? Isn't it really on Facebook at this point to make sure that doesn't happen again?
I do believe they're acting in with good intent, but think about this, Emily. I mean, they've grown from a platform of a few 100,000 people to 2 billion people in 12 to 14 years. It's really an extraordinary platform, and it's an extraordinary problem. And I don't think we can just rely on Facebook's word. Congress needs to do two things. First, we need to significantly fund the National Science Foundation, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, research universities, so that we can do the type of research in machine learning, in artificial intelligence that is going to be necessary to protect our national security and to prevent this kind of Russian meddling or other types of interference. That's for Congress to make those kind of investments in research and in development, and we're not making those investments. Secondly, we need to have a right to individuals having a right to secure data and making sure that there are ad disclosures. Senator Klobuchar has a bill along that lines so that Facebook is required by law to comply, and that will put added incentive on their engineers to really come up with a solution if they have a legal liability that incentivizes them to do that.
But that's not necessarily going to happen before 2018, before November.
You're right. I mean, unfortunately, given the speed with which Congress moves, I'm not optimistic that these laws are going to be passed before that. And all I would say is until then, Congress should try to act as much as we can, because we are putting ourselves at risk without those laws. And I do hope that Facebook and other tech companies will realize that more of these breaches is going to further erode the public trust. These are platforms that largely were widely admired. I still think, as I travel around the country, there are a lot of people who look to tech with a positive framework, a positive sense, and they risk losing that if there are more and more of these breaches. So I think it is in Facebook's self-interest and a lot of tech companies' interest to put as much resources behind this to solve the problem. But it's not going to be easy, and there is vulnerability there.
That was Congressman Ro Khanna. We also caught up with Representative Leonard Lance of New Jersey, who grilled Mark Zuckerberg on Capitol Hill.
I asked him a direct question, and Emily, he responded, and I tend to disagree with his response, and the Federal Trade Commission is now investigating the matter, and I hope that the investigation occurs in a timely fashion.
So what are you most concerned about?
I'm concerned about the privacy of the American people, and certainly the privacy of the American people was violated in this situation, and moving forward, we have to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
So do you think that more regulation is necessary?
I am a co-sponsor of a bill sponsored by Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, the browser bill, and that would have a system that would be more protective of the privacy of the American people, and you would have to opt in, and I think that's the way we should proceed. And the browser bill is for all forums, not just edge providers, but also ISPs, and I think that is the way to proceed.
Beyond the browser bill, is there any regulation that you would support, given that, there are a wide range of topics at play here beyond privacy?
I want to make sure that companies have the ability to innovate, but that does not mean that they have should be in a situation where they invade the privacy of the American people. And certainly Congress wants to make sure that that does not occur. I think the browser bill would go a very long way in that regard.
Now, Speaker Paul Ryan now reportedly won't run for re-election. I feel like I have to ask you about this since we have you. Do you think that's good or bad for the Republican Party?
I think that the Speaker will continue to be involved to the highest extent in his responsibilities till the end of the year. He will remain Speaker until the end of the year. He will continue to be engaged in fundraising, for example. I wish him and his family well. And Emily, I think this was a personal decision based upon the fact that he wants to help raise his children in Janesville, Wisconsin. This is a very cynical town, and there are all sorts of explanations. I believe the Speaker when he says that he wants to be involved in the raising of his children with his wife, Jana. Moving forward, he is going to be working on behalf of Republicans across the country over the course of this year. And then there will be a new Speaker come January.
Do you believe it has anything to do with friction with the president?
I do not. I believe it has to do with the fact that Paul is a young man. He's 48 years old. He has a whole life ahead of him. He will be very successful in whatever he does, and I take him at his word. He and his wife are raising their 3 children in Janesville, Wisconsin, and he wants to be more involved with that.
Now, back to Facebook going forward. I know you've got the browser bill, but bigger picture, how much of the responsibility to protect, to self-regulate falls on Facebook, and how much do you think this falls on Congress and the law?
I think it's a combination of both, and the COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, last week indicated that she thought the company had done as good a job as it should do, and that is obviously the case. And Mr. Zuckerberg, in effect, said the same thing both to the Senate yesterday and to the House today. And therefore, I think we should move forward with the browser legislation, and we should not rely on what Facebook or any other company says, because it's the responsibility of all of us working together to protect the privacy, not only of the American people, but really of people across the globe, because this affected not only citizens here in this country, but those across the globe as well. And that's why the British Parliament is investigating this matter as well.
That was Congressman Leonard Lance joining us from Washington. Meantime, Alibaba's Jack Ma is calling on Mark Zuckerberg to, quote, fix Facebook. The social media giant is facing public criticism and legal scrutiny around the world after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which could have shared data on tens of millions of users. Ma, who is China's richest man, said the social network was valuable, and the issues could have resulted from Facebook's unprecedented expansion. Coming up, Betterment offering wealth management to the masses with its robo-advisors. We'll hear from its CEO next. This is Bloomberg. A major partnership in the streaming space, Spotify and Hulu, announced solidifying their partnership by offering a bundle of both services to consumers for $12.99 a month. For that price, you get Spotify Premium and Hulu Video On Demand with ads. The two parties began first offering the bundle to students back in September, but they are expanding the promotion. Operating in the heart of the financial capital of the world, New York-based Betterment is looking to disrupt the finance industry, going after high net worth clients with robo-advising. So, will cutting-edge technology and low fees help usher more clientele into the startup? We asked that question of John Stein, the CEO of Betterment.
We have always used technology to reduce costs, to help people reduce their taxes, to give them full holistic financial planning. And it takes a lot of data and processing of that data to deliver financial advice. We also use it on the customer servicing side to help give them more delightful experiences and route them intelligently. But AI, in terms of what it's actually doing to better manage your money, is still in the early stages. And I think that's true in most financial services companies who are just beginning to start to see the power of that technology.
So what does that mean? Like, what can't you do now that you might be able to do in 2 years?
Well, if you believe that in a few years we'll have self-driving cars, as I do, of course you believe that we'll have self-managing wallets. And I can't imagine that in 10 years people are still going to be managing their balances between their checking account and their savings account.
God, that is so
annoying. How much should be in stocks and bonds, right? All of that can be better done by technology than it can be done by humans. And it's much less annoying if you don't have to do it yourself.
That said, there are larger incumbents getting into your business, and does this become a commodity?
One of the things that's really exciting for us is that incumbents are coming in, and I think they're driving attention to the space and driving customers to us, because all of these incumbents are conflicted. All of them are selling their own products. And if you go to Vanguard, of course you expect you're going to get Vanguard funds, but if you go to Schwab, you're getting Schwab funds. If you go to Merrill Lynch, you're getting funds that they're getting paid to offer you. If you come to Betterment, we don't get paid by anyone. We don't get paid to sell you certain funds. The only way we make money is the fee that you pay us to advise you. So we're a fiduciary advisor, and that makes us unique in the robo-advisor space. We're the only one who's always looking out for our customers' best interests.
Do you have any plans to expand, though? Because some of your competitors are, for example, partnering with banks to offer things like checking accounts and credit cards. Is that something that you would do?
What I'm excited about is how do we help customers make the most of their money? We've always tried to make more of your money. So I don't want to give you just a checking account. I want to give you something better. I want to make your checking account smarter and help you make more money off everything that you own. That's what we do. So you won't see us launch just a checking account or just a debit card like all these other players are doing. You'll see us do things that help you make more money.
How many assets do you have under management today?
$13.5 billion for 350,000.
So how fast do you expect that to grow?
We grew 120% year over year, Q1 this year to Q1 last year. I expect that kind of growth to continue.
How are you advising on tech? Given A, lots of market volatility, B, lots of uncertainty around what happens with Facebook.
I think it's really interesting what's going on with Facebook and in the broader sense of wanting to regulate these big tech companies, right? And I share, as a consumer of these companies, I want that regulation as well. And when we get asked that question, I like to remind people that we have always been highly regulated. Part of the reason I got into this business is because regulation had stifled innovation for a long time, and I saw there was a need to break through. Now, we're regulated by the SEC and by FINRA as an investment advisor and a broker-dealer. And
does that same regulation need to apply to tech?
I think regulation needs to apply to every industry. I think over time, like most of the tech industry is doing brand new things, and you need new thoughts and new regulations to help protect consumers.
And has what's happened with Facebook impacted how you think about the user data, the very sensitive user data that you have?
Well, because we're so highly regulated, we've always had to think very carefully about data. We don't store anything that's too sensitive. But your data is so important to giving you a full financial plan. If you think about the traditional advisor relationship, you'd bring a shoebox full of receipts and papers and stuff like that and hand it over to your advisor to help them make a plan. We've automated much of that process and made it painless and digital and seamless. But we have to take great care with that financial data to make sure that it's always used in your best interest. We never sell your data. We never rent it to anyone else. No one else has access to it, and we don't use any proprietary passwords. So if you have your Betterment data shared elsewhere, you have app-specific passwords that no one else can use your data.
That was John Stein, CEO of Betterment. Coming up, overseas, European regulators were keeping a close eye on Mark Zuckerberg's testimonies on Capitol Hill. We'll take a look at what's facing the social media giant in Europe. This is Bloomberg. Finally, one more conversation on Facebook. There have been heated reactions to CEO Mark Zuckerberg's appearance in Washington, including those in the EU. And Europeans don't seem to be convinced. German Justice Minister Katharina Barley was critical of the CEO. She took to Twitter, citing Zuckerberg's pledge that he would accept responsibility for his company's failures, saying that, quote, apparently this hasn't been that important until now. Bloomberg Gadfly's Alex Webb in New York and Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London joined us to weigh in.
In Europe, there is, of course, a far greater concern with privacy, particularly in Germany, as you mentioned, for, I think we've discussed in the past, historical reasons, which I think a lot of people know about. That has driven us a new set of regulations on the European level, the general data protection regulation. But in Europe, more broadly looking at Facebook, there's always been a certain question mark about why do Silicon Valley companies need so much data, and the question is, are they shutting the barn door well after the horse has bolted? And, is it too little, too late? Clearly better than nothing at all, but I think there is that certain sort of superciliousness in that respect.
Now, interestingly, Zuckerberg has said he thinks that Europe's data privacy rules and GDPR specifically is a standard that should be applied around the world and something that Facebook will apply around the world, whether or not U.S. lawmakers decide to do something similar. Caroline, also very interesting that Mark Zuckerberg was one of the Cambridge Analytica 87 million. So his data was potentially misused by Cambridge Analytica. What should we make of this leadership shuffle over there? Give us some more context.
Yeah, I think we've got to remember that Cambridge Analytica still feels that it has done no wrong. We keep on hearing from the company throughout this particular 2 days of testimony of Mark Zuckerberg. They've been claiming once again that we didn't break any laws, is what they've taken to Twitter, saying that overall they're saying that they didn't use this 87 million data treasure trove in the 2016 presidential election. They didn't use it in an EU referendum. And this is why I think we're seeing still so much shuffling at the top of Cambridge Analytica. We know that, as you say, Alexander Nix, who had been the helm, who had been caught on camera, particularly by a UK news organisation, the Channel 4 News, had secret video footage they took of him bragging about some of the more questionable tactics he uses in campaigns at Cambridge Analytica. He has now fully resigned. As we now know, the chief data officer who was acting as CEO has gone back to his usual role. I think it just means that there's yet more confusion at the helm of Cambridge Analytica.
So speaking of confusion, Zuckerberg says something very interesting today, in that they're looking more deeply at Cambridge University and whether there is something bad going on more broadly. What did he mean by that?
Yeah, shock, horror at the very heart, throwing them under the bus, it would seem, the very vanguard of the academic institutions at the heart of the UK. And he's saying, questioning whether they're going to investigate researchers at Cambridge University. Remember, it's Alexander Kogan was at Cambridge University when he was doing these particular apps, inventing them, getting the data from these users. And notably, there was really firm rhetoric coming from Cambridge University itself in response to this. I say that they said they were really rather surprised that Mark Zuckerberg hadn't overall known about what was going on at the University of Cambridge. He himself is saying they need to understand whether you say something bad was going on at Cambridge University overall and whether they require stronger action from Facebook. Well, in response, Cambridge University says, look, we've made them aware. Not only have we written them a letter back on the 21st of March asking them, desiring them to provide evidence against Alexander Kogan, who of course was working at Cambridge University at the time. But they're also saying, look, we've been publishing findings of our data and our research since 2013. You should know about this.
All right, last quick question, Alex. We know Facebook executives, the CTO, is going to be testifying in the UK in a few weeks. We have 30 seconds left. How will it be different than what we've seen here in the US?
I think there will be, the problem here was there were a lot of different senators, a lot of different lawmakers asking questions, and they were constrained by time. They had 4 minutes a day, 5 minutes yesterday each. That's very little. It meant that it was very hard to pose follow-up questions. In the UK, that's not going to be the case. There are fewer people on each select committee, a bit more time, and I think that gives them a far greater opportunity to really dig into the nitty-gritty and hopefully get more substantive answers, which Zuckerberg wasn't able to deliver today.
That was Bloomberg's Alex Webb and Caroline Hyde. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We will bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Tune in every day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.